We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Welcome in to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Excited to have you all with me today. Have an awesome interview lined up, a very unique topic. So unique, honestly, I don't think I've ever really heard it talked about in this specificity anywhere else. And on top of that, it is something that is actually happening right now. Putting libertarian philosophy and logic into action. So excited to interview my guest today. Excited for you all to hear what he has to say. So we'll introduce him in just a moment. Before I get to that, I do want to remind everyone that Lions of Liberty is sponsored by Masa Chips. Masa Chips are tortilla chips that are fried in grass-fed beef tallow. They are not fried in seed oils. Don't have any of that garbage in there. It is a startup. It is a small company at this point. Every single order of Masa Chips is handmade. As they scale up their business, obviously, things will expand and they won't be handmade forever. But you can play a vital role, a crucial role in helping this small startup disrupt the really corrupt mega food corporations that feed us all of the garbage and seed oils and artificial junk that they can shove in our food to cheapen it out and to make everybody fat and unhealthy. So fight back against that. Go to masachips.com and put in promo code LIONS for 10% off your order. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about, if you've been a member of the Lions of Liberty Pride, you will notice that recently, every interview that I do, you get a bonus segment. And today's episode is no different. So if you want to hear today's bonus segment with my guest, you do. What you want to do is make sure to join the Lions of Liberty Pride at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty or at lionsofliberty.locals.com. And what you can do is you can put the RSS feed into your podcatcher. So you listen to this episode right afterwards in your podcatcher. You'll see the bonus episode. You listen to that and you get everything. It's you really can't beat it. You can't. So do it. But that's really all I have, I think, for today. So let's get to the show. Let's do it. We are live to the Lions of Liberty Pride, and I'm joined here today by Alex Voss. Alex is a senior advisor of the Free Cities Foundation. He has a background in investment banking, and he joined Titus Gebel as the CFO of TIPOLIS Corporation from its beginning. Alex currently lives in Chicago and is working to expand the ideas of the Free Cities Foundation to the Americas. He studied economics and finance at the University of Chicago and Notre Dame and holds the CFA Charter. I believe that stands for Chartered Financial Analyst. And more recently, Alex has formalized his study of Austrian Economics under the tutelage of the Mises Institute. I'm sure this audience is very familiar with that. So, Alex, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Thanks, John. Great to be here. I've been, I think, as I mentioned, a long-time listener, so nice to actually meet you and speak with you.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. And a bit of a theme the past couple episodes of longtime listeners coming on the show as guests. So we love to do that here at Lions of Liberty. But before we get started talking about a little bit about TIPOLIS and probably more so about the Free Cities Foundation and how we can build a free city from scratch, which is a pretty revolutionary idea. If you could give my audience a better idea about yourself, about how you became passionate about these ideas, so passionate about these ideas to really make it your living.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my background is really I grew up knowing two things. One, I was going to play basketball, and two, that I was going to go into finance and accounting of some sort. That was sort of the history of my family, and I certainly followed in that path. Was born and raised in Cincinnati. Had the opportunity to go to University of Chicago, which, while I have quibbles with their method of economics, it is nonetheless a very prestigious university, and a great place to go and frankly learn a fair amount. So I was fortunate to do that and play a little basketball there. Um, and that led me to studying economics and ultimately going into investment, where I spent the first 7 years of my career in Chicago doing hospital mergers and acquisitions for the most part. I mean, a few other things, but that was really the bulk of it. I certainly liked that. I don't have any issues with doing it necessarily. It can always be something to do in the future as well. But I felt like I was not making quite the difference in the world that I really wanted to. Uh, Selling hospitals is one thing, but I wanted to actually make a difference in individuals' lives. I wanted to empower people to do more things. I wanted to be entrepreneurial. I'd read a fair amount of Austrian economics at that point, and really found that the entrepreneur is, of course, the driving force of the economy. It's the people that are taking risks and trying to do things. And I felt like in my current role, it was a little bit too just taking things easy and going with the flow versus really taking control and ownership of my life and making it what I want it to be. That said, I read a book early on in my investment banking career, a book called Free Private Cities: Making Governments Compete for You, written by a gentleman named Titus Gebel. Titus is a German by heritage, and he was a lawyer, is his background. And he decided, similar to me, that while law is quite interesting and necessary, he wanted to be a creator. He wanted to build something for his own. And so he did that. He built a resources and mining company in Germany, and made a fair amount of money off of that, and ultimately was able to retire to Monaco with his family. But that's not the type of person Titus is to sort of rest on his laurels and enjoy his time in Monaco. He wanted to have a greater impact on the earth, and so he decided to use his legal analysis along with what he learned from being an entrepreneur, and the hassles and the issues and the troubles that they go through, to to write a book called Free Private Cities, and then to actually start a company trying to do effectively that: build as free, as private of cities as possible. Now, we typically don't market them so much as free private cities. Those can be difficult words in our business, but nonetheless, that is the model: is to sort of have a private law, a privately organized city within a host nation. And so Titus has devoted the rest of his life to that, and I was fortunate to be in communication with him through reading this book and given an opportunity to join him. And since that time, we've certainly grown closer and seem to work quite well together. So we've taken on this joint endeavor together.
How incredible is that? That in this day and age, you can read a book and then reach out and build a relationship with someone and then start working with them. Very cool story there. So you talked a little bit about how, I mean, I don't know how much you can get into this, because we talked pre-show, so there's some confidentiality, but you can't market them as free private cities. Can you talk at all about how they are, or how you do market them?
Yeah, sure. There's plenty that we can say sort of in generalities. Of course, each one is going to be very specific. The idea is that we're taking essentially a virgin piece of land, and it's very important that it starts out as a greenfield site, because we don't ever want to be accused of people living in our city that don't actively go out of their way to volunteer to live in the city under our jurisdiction. We want people to opt in. And so, of course, starting from a greenfield site makes that easier, but it makes just about everything else more difficult. We have to, put in all of the infrastructure, you name it, any first world
Hmm.
infrastructure you'd think of, we have to put in. So I guess the answer to who builds the roads is us. Um, so that's the major idea of what we're doing from a greenfield site. Now, the idea of this is that we want to go to a host nation in the first part of this process. We are um, trying to essentially follow the path of special economic zones and their proliferation over time. So, special economic zones really started in the 1970s in China, when China decided to turn the city of Shenzhen, along with a couple of others, but that's sort of the success story is Shenzhen, which was at the time really kind of a sleepy fishing village. And now it's a city of 15 plus million people with, it's one of the largest 20 cities on the globe. Um, it's a major success story of what happens because China realized, hey, people aren't investing in our country. Entrepreneurs aren't starting businesses. Nothing really seems to happen. The same old fishers teach their children to be fishers, and then they go and it's just the same thing repeats. And no one ever takes big, bold, ambitious plans. And why is that? And they realized, well, at least part of it is the communist China regime is not so friendly to investments. And while many of the nations that we're working with are not necessarily as extreme, at least in terms of communism, but nonetheless, sometimes are that extreme in terms of poverty. We're trying to convince them that at least a part of the problem is that the institutions are lacking. There's no rule of law. There's no protection for investment. There's no, if you want to start a business, you have to go to the minister of, economics to get this and that permit. Then you have to go to the registrar to start up a company and pay, this and that other person. There's so many steps to jump through in order to do things. So it's much easier to just sort of go on about your business as you otherwise would. And so special economic zones really took off from those days with China to now there are approximately 5,000 special economic zones in about 150 countries across the globe. So obviously we went from a small thing to a big thing. Now, our view is that that was wonderful and liberating for many of those countries, but the benefit of creating the 5,001st special economic zone is quite minimal. You can
Hmm.
already, from a multinational perspective, if you're a multinational company, you can pick your jurisdiction that you want to manufacture. You can pick the markets that you want to sell to. You can pick the headquarter country for your company. And using these three and certainly other levers and some interesting accounting and tax questions, you can really minimize your global tax rate that you're effectively paying. So at this point, special economic zones are not so much. It's not so much of an advantage to just lower the taxes or to help import export. Those things are pretty standard. Most multinationals can get those things. What's not so standard is allowing those benefits for the mom and pop store, the little restaurant
Hmm.
down the street, the little grocery store, the individual internet entrepreneur, the person who has a new, has the idea to build a new Amazon or something like that. Those people don't quite have the same ability. They're really starting from whatever jurisdiction they happen to be born in for the most part. And so
Hmm.
what we're trying to do is really expand those benefits. Someone who chooses to opt into our jurisdiction, we want to provide as business friendly of an environment as possible. And we really think that because we're a for-profit company trying to provide those governance services, we're going to be incented very strongly to make it as easy. At the same time, we don't want any um, criminal activity, those types of things. We're very, very strongly incented to make sure that it's easy to do business, but that criminals aren't finding it to be a safe haven. So that's more or less the sort of business idea of what we're trying to build.
That's extremely fascinating. And you said there's one active project going on right now. Where is that?
Yeah, so there is one active project there. It's in Honduras. The Hondurans passed a law a number of years ago. I think it was 2017, called the ZA law. It's called the Zones for Economic Development and Employment, and it's not exactly our model, but nonetheless is probably the most advanced jurisdictional change in the globe right now. It would be more adequately described as a sort of public-private partnership, where each ZA, and there are 3 of them currently, each ZA is sort of a local municipality, but it's really driven for and promoted by a for-profit company who can make money off of basically administering these local governance services quite well. So these ZAs, they certainly fall underneath the sovereignty of Honduras. As I said, there are 3 of them. One on the island of Roatan, which is called Prospera. One in a town in the industrial heart of Honduras, a town called Choloma, and that city is called Ciudad Morazan. And then another one in the south of Honduras that we're somewhat less familiar with. They're less interested in really pushing the boundaries of governance and more interested in sort of using their zone as a special economic zone. So we haven't focused there as much. The two other ones are really quite fascinating, and it shows you already just between the 2 of them how different for-profit companies can compete to provide governance services, and how that results in a better opportunity to live together with people just between the 2 of them, and we expect that to proliferate. In the case of Prospera, it's certainly marketed as a sort of libertarian mecca, I would say. It's very expat friendly. It's on the island of Roatan, which is to the north of the country. The island, I think, if you're trying to set your mind as to what it's like there, is you could probably start with a base case of saying it's a Caribbean island, and that's pretty good description. Versus Morazan is really in the industrial heart of Honduras, and there's a fair amount of crime nearby. It's hardworking area. There's a fair amount of poverty, that type of thing. In Prospera, they've been very bold about implementing their own common law code and regulatory codes as well. They set up their own financial authority to regulate, financial services companies within the zone. So they've really gone the distance in terms of trying to innovate in governance. Whereas Morazan has a bit an equally admirable but somewhat less ambitious goal. And what they're trying to do is really provide a safe and secure environment for manufacturing to work within Ciudad Morazan, give a place for locals to live where they don't have to fear gangs and cartels. It's easy to pay their taxes. They can rent apartments there. I think the going rate is something like $120 per month. I know I pay more than that in Chicago, so it sounds like a decent deal. It's so that you can just see, and they've really taken more or less Honduran the Honduran laws, and then just tweaked it where necessary. And so you can see right there. I mean, the idea is for them, Prospera wants to basically remake the entire law that we live under, whereas Morazan is just trying to tweak it here and there where they can make life easier for their particular clientele that they're marketing to. And we expect that to sort of continue to proliferate. People might think in the future it's the best idea to just take Delaware law, or it's best to take Singapore law for this and Australian law for that. You can pick and choose, whatever you think is best, or you can create it on your own.
Yeah, it's truly decentralization. I mean, it's similar in a way to what we have in the United States with the 50 states and able to decentralize in that fashion, well, to some degree at least.
Yeah.
But so can we talk about, let's talk about the Free Cities Foundation and how that fits in and what the mission is with the Free Cities Foundation. Then we can get into, really digging deeper into this idea.
Sure. Yeah. So the Free Cities Foundation is a very distinct organization from TIPOLIS. So TIPOLIS is trying to do and build and operate these new free cities, or we'll have some new terms probably to describe them in the near future. What the Free Cities Foundation is while it is distinct, it's really trying to promote this idea of we can have private governance solutions. We can have new territories, new jurisdictions within jurisdictions, and we can find new ways of living together that are really privately organized and privately administered. And so the Free Cities Foundation is really just trying to promote the idea of free private cities. It's a Liechtenstein foundation. The ideas have, I would say, while there's still more proliferation to come in Europe, they have proliferated a bit more than here in the States. Probably that's partly because Titus himself is German and has spent most of his time speaking over there. I would say another part of that is that in Europe, you didn't have as many options. I guess the COVID is a very good example. If the German government said you're locked in your house and you can't go out, you were locked in your house and you just couldn't go out. Versus in the US, if you didn't like that, well, then go to Florida or go to wherever, Arizona. There's a bit more of an option. And so I'm sure there are other reasons as well, but those being two of them, these ideas have certainly spread in Europe more than they have in the US. And I'm, as the, I think, sole American with the US American with the foundation, trying to really bring those ideas to America and help people see that, look, America's great in many, many ways. It's phenomenal, but it also could stand to benefit from some of these ideas. And it's sort of, we certainly admire Michael Bolden and the 10th Amendment Center and what they're doing. Ours is obviously less constitutionally driven, but nonetheless the same sort of promoting new jurisdictions that people do things, opt in and do things as they wish, and we don't have to have one sort of top-down rule that everyone has to always live by.
So on the website, you talk about different terms like intentional communities, prosperity zones, and free private cities. Can you talk about what those terms mean?
Sure. Yeah, so the idea from the foundation is really, initially this foundation in its first, I think about 5 years of existence, it was called the Free Private Cities Foundation. And the idea was to really promote just free private cities, this model where it's not sovereign, but effectively 100% autonomous territory within a host nation. We realized that we're not there yet in terms of the political realities on the ground. We're not really that close to getting to a point where you can just take a little piece of land and make the next Singapore of it. You just can't do that right now. What you can do is point to these special economic zones and see the success of sort of jurisdictional arbitrage and some new systems within systems. And so the Free Cities Foundation, when they changed their name, really started to focus on broadening the scope of what we're advocating for. It's not just that we have to have our model and we want it this way and only this way. The idea is to promote movement towards people living, deciding to live in communities that they value, that they appreciate, that they opt into. And so in that regard, we've opened it up to, as you said, prosperity zones, special administrative regions, intentional communities, so on and so forth. And I guess while each of them has somewhat unique definitional aspects to them. In broad terms, what we can say really is that intentional communities are probably the least innovative on this sort of, if you think of it as a spectrum. Free private cities are as autonomous, and intentional communities are the least autonomous. Intentional communities don't really have any de jure autonomy. They're simply groups that want to live together because they enjoy whatever it is that they're intentionally focused around living. Maybe it's, they like gardening or working out or whatever, there's any number of things. There's tons of these sorts of communities, and our role at the foundation is to promote this sort of idea, in the sense that, while they don't have de jure liberty or freedom or autonomy, what they do have is they allow people to live together in a trusted community, and therefore find more freedom for themselves, because they're living amongst people who they trust, who they value, who they that time. That said, we are actively.
Would New Hampshire and the Free State Project be a version of an intentional community?
Yeah, I would say that's true, and they're even bordering on something more, considering they have had such success in getting people elected, and then change in the government. So while they are not autonomous from the United States government, in some sense, you absolutely could make that argument. But it doesn't have to be that big of a scale. It could just be 15 people that you and some of your close friends move out to whatever, a suburb, because you like the bike trail there and you want to go on weekly bike ride thing. It can be as simple as that. The idea is to get people actively thinking about moving to jurisdictions that treat them right, whether that is legally or whether that's just treating them right through connecting them with the people that they'd like to be connected with. So that's sort of the least autonomous end. Free private cities is the most autonomous end, and then most of the other categories really fall somewhere in between. Prosperity zones is a pretty common one that we refer to, and that's essentially this idea of, well, a host nation will allow a special economic zone. They'll probably even allow a special economic zone plus, but they won't allow a full free private city. So in this sense, they might grant, okay, you can create your own, civil law. You can have a company registry in your own land registry, but you need to keep criminal law from the host nation. We don't want drug dealers, so keep the criminal law of XYZ country. And so it's just sort of a give and take on, and it's admittedly a gray area as to where you categorize each of these. Another, sort of added benefit of prosperity zone is it's not a very contentious term. Most people do prefer prosperity, even if we have different ideas about how to get there.
Right. Yeah, that's a very, very marketable term, prosperity. So now, is within the United States, you talked a little bit about politically, how that we're not necessarily very close to being able to build up, a greenfield free private city in the U.S. or probably, a lot of places where most places we're not close to it. So what types of restrictions or constraints are currently preventing that you think could be changed to be able to make this more of a reality in the future?
Do you mean in the U.S. or just anywhere?
Let's just say in the U.S. for now, and then maybe we can go to an area that you think is maybe close that has some restrictions that could be lifted.
Sure. Well, the choice that we've made in this model is really to go the route of asking for permission. I am fully aware that that's not always the best method. And many times, especially with entrepreneurship, asking for forgiveness is much better. Nonetheless, because we are talking about not just starting an Uber and then it's easy to very quickly show the benefits of that, and regulators can't really shut it down because then they look like the bad guy. We're talking about a much grander and bigger idea. One that quite literally people have fought civil wars over in the past, is over authority and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
We think that it's very important to get agreement beforehand. It's just the nature of the beast. So, in that sense, it really comes down to whether or not you're able to get in the room and speak with people who, have these ideas and or are willing to listen to these ideas and be convinced. In the U.S., it's a bit of a problem, not just because it's Joe Biden and the Democrats in charge right now. That's probably prohibitive on its own, but because the United States doesn't really need what we're doing as bad as other places. They're not struggling for investment the way many other countries around the world are. They're not struggling for entrepreneurs to come here. We have, more people want to come here than we're willing to let in. So it's not so much of a problem that we can solve necessarily from a United States perspective. There are things you can do on the state level, and I would say the Free State Project is doing many of them, and we discuss with them regularly ways we can work together and try to promote this. We also talk with the 10th Amendment Center folks as well, because it's the same sort of idea. It's how can you decentralize things so that more decisions are made locally, and with decisions being made locally, you not only have more influence, but you also have the ability to get in the room and convince more people that these ideas could be good. The odds of me going up to Capitol Hill and convincing them of some sort of privatized governance might as well be zero. But you very well could convince a mayor, and we've talked with some, that, hey, why don't we try privatize everything here? And we could even privatize the entire jurisdiction itself, potentially. That said, you're still under the sovereignty of the state if you're a local jurisdiction, and you're still under the sovereignty of the federal government. So the challenge really is getting in the room with the right decision makers. In our capacity, the decentralization of America makes the opportunities to do something on the state level greater, but the total size of the United States and the chances that we'd be able to get a hold of anyone as well as convince them and then actually have it go through is effectively zero. But that's not the case with many countries.
Let's pause there, because I want to stick with the United States for a minute, because
Sure.
I totally agree with you. The incentive is not there right now. I don't think. I think people are still very comfortable. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when we were in the middle of COVID lockdowns, there might be more of an appetite to push for something like this. But excuse me, something in particular that I think could shift this is central bank digital currencies. And we've even seen recently, within the past week, I think Ron DeSantis, I think he put a bill forward, or at least was discussing it publicly, that he didn't want to have CBDCs in Florida, and was pushing other Republican governors to make the same statement, or maybe there was a bill attached to it. I can't remember if there was. So do you envision that if that were to happen, if CBDCs are implemented, by the Federal Reserve, as something like a free private city, or maybe a free private state or group of states coming together to kind of resist this the force and infringement of CBDCs?
I would caveat that I don't necessarily think it's likely, but I 100% agree with you that it increases the chances of something being successful. It's another nature of the beast with what we do, that dire circumstances lead to opportunity for us. It's look, things are. I'm in Chicago. It has many, many problems, but it's far too comfortable for anyone to consider doing something like what we're doing. I mean, there's crime everywhere, but it's not dire on a global or on a historical scale. Unfortunately, it seems like it really takes major disaster for people to start to say, "Hey, well, it couldn't be worse, so let's try. Let's give this a shot." I think I do think that CBDCs present that threat. I'm fully on board with that. I think they're about the worst possible thing that could happen. I hope the American people, or at least the people of, say, Florida or wherever else would be empowered and behind their governor to say, no, we're not doing it here. I'm not as convinced that that will actually happen. Now, Florida is probably right under DeSantis's leadership, but COVID taught me to be a little bit more humble about what I think the American people will take. So,
That's fair.
yeah, I think there's opportunity for us. There is opportunity in the U.S. too. There are interesting things going on that could happen in the U.S. Now, nothing fully free private city, but on the margins, there are things to do. And I say that looking at, one of the interesting things we do looking around the world is there are something like 196 UN recognized nation states, but there are thousands of quasi nation states, as I would describe them, places that are overseas territories, Indian reservations, Mennonite communities. You have all kinds of these. You even have overseas territories from other countries. You have the Dutch and the French and the British have a lot of territories in the Caribbean, those types of places. So there are lots of little pieces of land all scattered all across the globe that have very interesting sovereignty questions about them. Who exactly controls them? Each one is very much unique. And so, there are plenty of opportunities to look around the globe for that, including some within what is typically thought of as the United States, sovereignty, and they frankly are under the United States sovereignty. But nonetheless, they have sort of special jurisdictional ability to do things that typical states or cities within the mainland U.S. do not have.
So a lot of these places, you mentioned before that in order for people to be receptive to an idea like this, there needs to be problems, issues, high crime, no economic investment, something like that. In a lot of places like that, in the third world, in Africa, people have been taken advantage of by foreign nations coming in and exploiting the people there, and the political leaders in the area falling to corruption and taking payoffs and running off with the money. I'm just curious, as with an idea like this, it would take a lot of trust, right, to implement a free private city. And is that something that is that is talked about? Is that something that is part of a marketing plan, or how does that factor in?
It's a huge issue. It may be, I guess the biggest threat in my view is that we are successful somewhere and then a nation says, hey, I like what you've done there, I'm going to take it now. That's probably number one. But behind that, number two is the perception of what we're doing. It needs to be thought of as a good thing for locals, for that host nation, for anyone that moves there. It's a huge challenge. It's an uphill battle. It's something that I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about. We will continue to spend a lot of time thinking about. I'm sure we'll make mistakes, but we'll keep trying to improve. It takes an immense amount of trust. It's why we think these types of projects, we think it's good for people to consider moving, overseas to them and opting in. But if we're going to be realistic about it, that's not really the clientele that's most likely to move. Who's most likely to move is from other parts of the same host nation. And they're likely to move because it's not as far, there are job opportunities, and they can feel safe. So just like we've seen in Morazan, there are, I think, 2 expats living out of the 120 or so that live, maybe 100 that live in Morazan. 2 are expats. The rest are local Hondurans that came there because they found a good home that's safe and an opportunity for employment. And I don't know exactly the right ratios, but that seems to me to be about right. That you're going to find most of the movers amongst the local population. So what we're trying to build in each case is a city that has stable rule of law and security, but for the benefit really of locals. I do think
Mhm.
that helps the perception a little bit. It's not, you European colonialists or you American Yankees. It's it's really that we're entrepreneurs just trying to build a zone, and you can choose to opt into it, and most likely the people would be schools anyway. Ultimately, down the line, we would certainly love to have communities where there's locals, there's from all over the globe, all that type of stuff. We think that it's absolutely possible for different, different communities to come together and live together. But I think if we're being honest about it, Americans aren't going to move right away, and so that does help us with the framing. So I think that's really the idea: is the marketing needs to be focused on how does this benefit the residents, how does it benefit the host nation, and how are we able to do this? In order to help both the residents and the host nation and still make a profit out of what's in it for us. So people want to understand all three of those aspects. And so I think that we tried hard to focus on how what we're doing is providing good governance, but minimal governance. We're not going to get
Mhm.
in your way. We want entrepreneurs to come in and do what they need to do. We do not want buildings crumbling down. We do not want crime in the city. So basically, what we want to do is make sure that it's safe and that you can build what you want to build. That's about it. So if you like that offering, then please do come and move in and quickly build your business, and we'll all reap the rewards of that. So that I think that's really how we'll focus the marketing. Is it's an opportunity for entrepreneurs and builders and creators to come there. It's not so much that we're trying to build a libertarian paradise. It's sort of, I am libertarian myself, but the idea is to build a community for people, reasonable people, to come together and live together. It's not to build a libertarian mecca.
Libertarian paradise cannot exist in reality, really. But
Yep.
so let's talk about funding and opting in. So if people decide to move to one of these areas, maybe starting with locals first, what do they need to do? I mean, are they signing a contract? Are they paying in a certain fee? Do they have to pay every year, or how does that part of it work?
Yeah. So while every one of these will be somewhat unique because it has to conform to the needs of the host nation, the idea and what we've sort of have on the table in terms of negotiations that are ongoing is situations where the private operator buys up, like I said earlier, virgin land, and they develop all the infrastructure for it. That operator can then decide to do with that land what he wants. He can sell pieces of land, he can rent it out, he can lease it out to businesses, those types of things. In our particular model, it would probably be a mixture of all three. Obviously, selling land early on, the sort of economic or the business plan side of this is that we buy land in a relatively cheap area. It's cheap for two
Hmm.
reasons. One is because typically it's undeveloped, and two, it's in a less than optimal jurisdictional environment. No rule of law or crime, whatever the problem is. We then build it up with the investment and not just the physical infrastructure, but sort of the operating infrastructure, the jurisdiction, the legal codes of the city also improved. And we think that there's a massive, potentially hundreds of times return on land if you can change it from being both undeveloped and in bad jurisdiction to being developed and in good jurisdiction. So that's sort of how the real estate model works. And then you can think in your own head, and I'm not sure I have the exact answers of, well, if you sell more land early on, that helps cash flow from a building the city perspective, but you're selling it at a reduced, you're not selling it at its most appreciated level versus hanging
Hmm.
on to it longer. And you have to somehow come up with the financing to develop the city, which is not cheap. but you can sell it later on after it's appreciated however many times. So that's sort of the major real estate aspect of the business plan. The second major part of the business plan is that we intend to not have taxes effectively in any of these cities. What we'd rather have is, if you'd like to move to the city, or you'd like to become an e-resident, or you'd like to become, in some way involved in the city, you sign an actual contract with our company, the operator of the city. And that contract lays out exactly what will happen. It will say, I, John Odermatt, will pay whatever, $5,000 per year, or, $150 per month, whatever it ends up being. And in return, I agree to abide by, these rules of living together, which are basic. And, the service company, TIPOLIS, or one of our subsidiaries, agrees to, provide me with dispute resolution and security. It's very, very clear exactly who's getting what and how much you're paying for it, and it can be unilaterally changed by either you or us. And so we really, really think that is one of the ways that you pin down a governance provider. You opt in, you say, this is what the contract says. Fortunately, now with what happens in the U.S. and the West at large, and has frankly always happened in other countries, is that they just unilaterally change it whenever they want. We think the tax rates are too low, so we're going to increase it. We, think that you should pay more fees, so you now have to buy a business license to do this thing, whatever. So we want to get rid of that by just having this contract in place. And so that's essentially all you'd have to do, is you'd have to somehow get in touch with us, which whenever one of these cities is set up. And if you're interested, you can check out Prospero's website. I can pull that up for you. And you can put it in the show notes. But if you go right to their website, they have ability to say, hey, I'd like to move here, or I'd like to become a resident, or that type of thing. And I suspect it will be similar for just about all of our other projects too. There's a very easy way to just say, hey, I'm interested. How do I do it? And it'd walk you through. So that's really the sort of business model of it. You don't have to, we're not, of course, responsible for figuring out your moving situation necessarily, but in terms of becoming a resident, it should be very simple to do, probably done online. Easy peasy.
It's pretty amazing. So I do one more question, and I want to get to the bonus show where we'll have about, a couple more questions, maybe another 10, 15 minutes. But there's so many different directions we could go here. I could ask you, we could talk for hours, but I mean, you do this for a living. You're in it every day. What have I missed asking you about that you think is really important for people to understand, a key takeaway, or, something that I totally missed asking you about?
Well, I don't think you missed asking me about anything in particular. One thing I think that's really interesting to note about this, I'm not sure I have a solution, but I think it's something that we, as people who want to find freedom, we need to realize that, frankly, a lot of that sounds good to a lot of people in spirit, and it's simply not followed by the right action. Now, the right action is not always, hey, let me move to this new venture city in, some new place. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but it's been very interesting how many people are actively supporting us, and yet the conversion ratio of people that would actually then move is very, very, very low. And I get that. I think that is, it is probably appropriate. There are many, many amenities to living in the United States. The U.S. government is not one of them, but many other good things that come about. And you have family and you have friends and all that kind of stuff. I do get that. I think it's one of those things we need to be in our community, and as people that are advocating for people to find more freedom, is to be a bit more holistic in considering why people do exactly what they do. It's not, people aren't going to move to our city just to lower their taxes. They're just not going to. They will move because it creates a community in which they feel comfortable living. The lower taxes or just having fees is certainly a benefit, but they want to move to a community that they feel home and at comfort with. They're willing to pay something to live in an environment that's probably appropriate. There are communal services. Now, I don't think they need to be provided by governments, but there are communal services that need to be provided for. So people are willing to pay them. But I think it's just a challenge that we will have going forward for our business. And I think it's a good thing for people to keep in mind, even as your own self. If you're sitting here listening to this and you're thinking, well, I've thought for so long about doing this or that business. Well, just give it a shot. I mean, you really got to just get up and give it a shot. And who knows? These cities might not work in the short run. That's absolutely possible. There are immense challenges to it, but people of action are the ones that are creating and building freedom, not just for themselves, but for everyone.
Yeah, I really like how you said that at the end. I think it's so important for libertarians or people who believe in these ideas. And you were talking at the top of the show about your experience with the Mises Institute and learning about entrepreneurship. And I've always been kind of surprised that more libertarian-leaning people, more Austrian economists, do not become entrepreneurs. A lot of them just kind of sit on the sidelines and critique everything that's happening, which never really made sense to me. So it's great that you're setting the example of taking that action, and who knows where it will lead to. It could work out. It could be, transform, different areas around the world, which would be completely amazing to watch. Or it could lead to another idea, and it could lead to another venture. Who knows where it will go? But before I let you go here, before we get into the bonus show, Alex, can you give your plugs, let people know where they can find all about TIPOLIS, where they can find about Free Cities Foundation, and anything else that you're working on in your social media?
Yep, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at AD12. And then TIPOLIS as a website, tipolis.com. Currently, it doesn't have much in the way there. We should be rolling out with a bit more information and maybe check back there. What's going to be more interesting for you is if you go to the Free Cities Foundation website, that can be found free-cities.org. That should have a lot of information about what we advocate for, various projects that people are working on around the world, how you might get involved. There's a blog there that you can read. The last thing you might check out is a website called lifetimeliberty.com. This is the website for our conference that we hold annually. It was in Prague last year. It will be in Prague again this year, so I know a bit further away to go for most Americans. But the focus of the conference is somewhat different than other libertarian conferences. It's, as the title suggests, it's called Liberty in Our Lifetime. It's really focused on what are the projects, what are the people, what are the tools that people are using right now to find freedom. This past year, we had the topic of parallel structures for freedom. So we had really a focus within governance, finance, and education. So we had a lot of speakers on unschooling, homeschooling. We had a lot of Bitcoin type of people. We had, new innovative fintech banks and things like that, as well as, all of the free city projects that were going on. So we expect the conference again to grow, and we'd certainly like to have more Americans involved. I'd love to spread the word and have any of you attend. And you can find out more information about that at lifetimeliberty.com.
Awesome. Alex Voss, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, John.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode today with Alex Voss. Really enjoyed the conversation with him. Enjoyed the bonus segment too. So hopefully, if you haven't listened yet, hopefully you will be listening. Hopefully you will be joining the Lions of Liberty Pride if you need to get access to that. And I'll just go back and say this again, because it seems like, so many of my guests that I have on recently, these are people, we're not talking freedom philosophy. We're not talking libertarian philosophy. We're not talking, hypotheticals. I'm talking to people who are taking action, who have boots on the ground, who are disrupting the current models that we have, from everything from, the food that we eat, and some of my recent guests, to how we live in cities and how we live in communities with each other. It's so refreshing just to see someone like Alex, who probably could make a ton of money in the short term and the long term, using his financial wisdom, using his mergers and acquisition wisdom to pretty much be set for life and do as he pleases. But as he said, he wants to make a difference in people's lives, and someone who has the skill set that he has to be able to team up and do this with these projects. It's really remarkable to watch. So I hope that you will follow along with the work that Alex is doing. I know I'll be following on, and I'm sure we'll have him back later on in a year or so to get an update on where things are. So hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. And I talked about joining the Pride. Brian and I are really going to push trying to get more people to really understand the value that you get in the Lions of Liberty Pride. I know people everywhere, all these podcasts, pump up their patron, their patron, whatever, groups. And what do you get? I'm in a bunch of them. Good people, great podcasts, but you really don't get much of anything in a lot of these groups. Brian and I have really focused on giving you tons of value. I mean, you're going to get Brian's rants every Monday through Friday, essentially, unless something goes awry in Brian's life, which does from time to time. You're going to get our bonus shows, Secrets, Lies, and Cover-Ups, Degenerate Gamblers, whenever that is in season. And you're going to get bonus segments with all of my guests. Plus, you can watch live on Facebook, and we are going to be expanding soon to another platform to yet be determined, to better engage with our friends and Pride members. Facebook just kind of sucks with groups. It's hard to even get any engagement on videos or posts, or you don't see stuff, doesn't pop up in your feed. So probably we'll keep Facebook for now, at least, but probably we'll be opening up a couple, or at least one other option, maybe Discord, maybe focus more on that. Not set in stone, but we're kind of thinking of ideas that we can engage better with with all of the listeners out there, the Pride members. So more to come on that. So hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to check out the Lions of Liberty store by going to lionsofliberty.store, where you can see all of our t-shirt designs, a lot of unique, eye-catching designs that we have there. So check that out. And that's all I got for you this week. So I will see everyone next week. The weather's getting warmer out there. Stay safe, stay free, and always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.